Have a quick announcement. Good morning and welcome to the 9:30 call on July 1st. I can't believe it's July. We made it. I know this week and last week is a lot of transition for folks as they transition from kind of a September to June schedule now for the summer. Usually with a little time for professional development in between. But I know there was an announcement from EEC about family child care facilities and support through that through mass development. So while Megan is talking, I will look for the email and put that information in chat. It can't. We got it from a few people. Oh, and Leah Cooley's here, who sent it to me. Wow, Donna Danette, 4th anniversary of our COVID reopening today. That puts things in perspective for sure. Okay. So as we're listening to Megan, if you have questions, please add them to the chat. And so Megan, our first question that we ask all 9:30 callers is for you to tell us a little bit about you and how you came to be in your current role. And Megan and I reconnected back at the Professional Learning Institute the NAYC had in New Orleans. No, yes, we were in New Orleans. It was great to see you. But our history goes back. So please tell us more about you, how you came to be in your current role, and then we're excited for your update.
Great. Thanks, Amy. It was great to connect with many folks in New Orleans, not too far from my home. But I love that you guys asked this question. How interesting it is to hear where we all came from, because I don't know that I've ever met two early childhood professionals that have come the same journey in any form or fashion. And I think it's both reassuring to the work that we do and just that we're a diverse workforce. There's a lot going on. We have different backgrounds, different education, different experiences. So this was really interesting to me, Amy. So thanks for asking and inviting me. I am a Texan. I live in Austin, to be specific. So born and raised, I'm one of the unicorns that is still from here. Nobody else is actually from here anymore. And I took a unique path. I actually started out as a 9th grade English teacher. Which surprises many. I also taught dance in my former life. My bachelor's is in dance. It's bizarre, but
Megan,
true.
I did not know either of that about you. Amazing.
So yeah, so a very interesting route. That was the longest year of my professional life, was teaching high school. I realized very quickly that was not at all what I wanted to do with my life. I turned my keys in the last day of school and I never went back. And I fell into running a Mother's Day Out program. A friend of mine said, "Hey, you've got a degree in teaching. You could do this." I said, "Sure. How hard could it be? There are 3. It'll be great." Quickly realizing I was so far in over my head. I had no idea what 2s, 3s, and 4s needed. I didn't know what I needed, long less being in charge. Didn't know what I needed in that capacity either. So quickly found a network within my local AEYC and went back and got a master's in early childhood because I needed to know what was going on.
Wow.
But I knew really quickly that I loved it. Like, it was amazing. It was the exact opposite of those high school freshmen. Like, they wanted me to be there. They loved it. They were exciting. Every day was new for them. Again, the exact opposite of a 14-year-old. They're still excited. They're not excited to see you for the most part, unfortunately. And so then I ran with it. And then I had a variety of roles. I taught in several different classrooms. My magic age was 3 and 4s. That's kind of where I found my niche, were 3 and 4s. I loved that age group. I was a director. I was an education coordinator for multiple sites for a couple of years, which was wonderful. And it became clear to me that I also wanted more. I wasn't quite sure what that would mean or what that would look like. And luckily, I had a director at the time in one of my centers that saw that and encouraged me to start presenting and training. And I started doing some internal work just with the staff that we had there as the ed coordinator. I had 60 teachers that I supervised and helped support. So that was a very rich training ground for how to teach adults and how to do that work. And then I started going outside of the classroom and outside of our building and doing training and working there. And before you knew it, I was working with our Texas AEYC. And that's where I spent the longest time. I helped support our Teach Early Childhood Scholarship program there for about 10 years. I started as a counselor, just supporting recipients with their scholarships, and then moved into the director role and stayed there for just over 10 years. And that was a very rich ground. There's only 2 employees when I started. When I left, there were many, many more.
Wow.
And so that was a really exciting journey and just evolution to grow in that space, from supports to advocacy work to connecting to relationships. It just was really fascinating and grew my skill set in ways I never even knew existed. And that kind of led me into the role that I am in today. I actually work for the Teach Early Childhood National Center. It's a division of Child Care Service Association. And they house the Teach and Wages program and also our apprenticeship program, which I'm going to tell you a little bit about today. And I serve as the director of workforce initiatives there. I've been there over 3 years now. I made the jump in COVID. So your reminder about COVID really kind of hit home there.
Yeah.
I made the switch during COVID, which was a little terrifying, but also really exciting. So that's my weird kind of evolution of how I ended up where I am today.
Thanks so much. And so for your update, will you share a little bit more about Teach and and do you have slides?
I do not have any slides.
Excellent. Okay, so let's
yeah, I'll put links in the chat
Great.
so you guys can access the website and things to learn a little bit more.
Now
Start with Teach, Amy.
Yes, that'd be great.
Okay. So the Teach Early Childhood Scholarship Program is probably the most widely known, I mean, hence our name. The program has been around nearly 35 years across the country. We are in 22 states across the country, so we're not everywhere, but we're in a lot of states. Over the years, we've been in roughly 30 states. Some of those come and go just due to funding, and like anything else, just kind of the evolution of what your workforce needs and what your states are investing in and how they're implementing those programs. That is a unique scholarship program that's very comprehensive. So most of our states offer associate's and bachelor's degrees. Some offer all the way from CDA to master's scholarships. It kind of depends. Every state really tailors the program to fit their needs individually. We like to say we provide the framework, Teach does, and then you customize that and make that really work in your state. It is a licensed program, so we have a rigorous support and TA structure, and then kind of an accountability system just to help support how the program's operating, how it's being implemented, and then where you could potentially grow that program in your state. And that's kind of how the Teach Scholarship Program works itself, and then how we implement it. And it really is a comprehensive workforce strategy. It really looks at tuition and books, the fiscal piece, but also going slow and steady, non-traditional students, what are the needs there? So there's a release time component built into the scholarships that pays for time off to balance work and school, because we know that that's a lot. These tend to be slow and steady scholarships. Most are around 9 hours a year of college credit. The workforce is working. They need to work. They cannot afford to take time off. And then there's financial compensation at the end in the form of bonuses, stipends, and wage increases, knowing that this program is built to support education, compensation, and retention along the way. That's the really short of the Teach program. I will put the link in the chat. So if you want to learn more, or you're interested or have questions, you can certainly check it out and always reach out for more.
And we've had many conversation over the years about Teach in Massachusetts, and we have some of the components in Massachusetts already. So we have an early educator scholarship that more recently, the language always said you could use it for a master's degree, but now we're able to use that. So, but I know it's certainly something that we've all paid attention to over the years. And so when we saw each other, we were talking about apprenticeships, and I was telling you in Massachusetts, we've seen different, models of apprenticeships, happening in Massachusetts. I also know they're happening across the country, and you had talked about kind of where you sit, that you've been able to see and hear and learn from other states. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that and your perspective around what you're seeing. And we didn't talk about this, but just like, where does it sit? Does it sit in state government? Does it sit in external organizations? Anything that you'd love to share?
Yeah, I think apprenticeship is kind of the buzzword. I mean, I think we go through this in early childhood, right? For years, it was QRIS. I mean, we kind of hit the ebb and flow of what's kind of trendy and topical at the moment. Well, apprenticeship is it. right? Like everybody's talking about it. There's a lot of investments, which is exciting. Both state and federal governments. The federal government has put a lot of grants and contracts out in the last few years that include early care and education, which is a first in that realm through Department of Labor. So that's been really exciting. And I think that was due to COVID being seen as essential. That's struggling a little bit now, but the funding was there federally. So we're going to capitalize on that piece. So where we sit is what we are called is a industry intermediary. And you may hear that term. There are 4 current early childhood intermediaries in the country. That is it. There's only 4. 3 are supported and funded through the US Department of Labor. We are not. We made the decision a couple of years back to start with private funding, mostly because this is so new. We wanted as much flexibility and latitude to kind of figure this out and what that meant for early childhood. And to be able to look at it from our perspective, which is really systems level work. Other intermediaries come at this differently and approach their work differently. But the short of what that means is an intermediary is there to help support a local, state, regional entity in building and developing an apprenticeship program. So it could sit in any of those places. It could be very local, it could be state, it could be regional. It can kind of fit any of those buckets. It doesn't have to be just one. And we all approach our work just a little bit different, but essentially it's technical assistance to help you do it, because apprenticeship is complex. Take early childhood and then take Department of Labor and then mash those 2 up. It's a whole nother department that we're trying to learn and figure out with their own sets of language and terminology and paperwork. And so that's what an intermediary really does, is just help support the technical assistance to do that and build those apprenticeship programs. We at the National Center, we are an intermediary currently for 7 states across the country, and we work at the state level. So ours are really all state level programs. They are all housed within nonprofits. Statewide nonprofits are housing these apprenticeships. That is not always the case. I mean, you can be an individual owner and develop and implement your own apprenticeship program. It's a lot of work. I encourage you to find an intermediary and think about if that's truly the right decision. But technically, we're Department of Labor, you can. But it's a lot. I can't imagine being a director and taking this on in addition to everything else. So most are happening within some nonprofit work or coordinating work. That's where most of these are living, and or community colleges. A lot of early childhood apprenticeships are springing up through community college systems.
And so what does it look like kind of when you're supporting these 7 states? What does it look like kind of day to day? How do they get started? I'm sure it's like having 7 different children.
That is putting it mildly. So really what we do is we take a step and really we come at it from a T.E.A.C.H perspective. Or a team state perspective. So we want you to develop a team. So we require that there are employers. So we need actual early childhood employers at the table. We want family home at the table, and knowing that that gets tricky, and that's a whole different discussion. We want Department of Labor at the local or state level part of the conversation, if at all possible. Sometimes initially we've got to develop that relationship, but at some point we want them to pull them in to the table. Your institutions of higher education, 2-year and 4-year, we want them at the table. And so we really help whoever is going to quote unquote be the sponsor or administrator for this work to develop that team. So we help them think through who that team should be, pulling those folks together. And the first few meetings are really just listening. What are the needs? What are your workforce needs? What are your state or community needs? What's happening there that we think an apprenticeship might be able to solve or to do better than we're currently doing? I mean, we've all been investing in workforce scholarships and education for a long time. What makes apprenticeship different? And so that's really what we do first. And then we take the heavy. We plan all of the meetings. We facilitate the agendas, the meetings, the research, the notes, putting everything together, document development. We really take the heavy on all of that so that the team and their administrator can focus on the doing, the developing of the relationships, the exploring what works for their state, that kind of work. I can't do that in every state, but I can put together a meeting for you. I can facilitate that and take notes. You know, those types of things. So that's really what we help. We have a kind of a template for the decision cycles for an apprenticeship. So like kind of an order of operations, and we just help guide you through that. It is not a perfect through line for every 2 states. Part of it depends on funding. Part of it depends on speed of which they want their work to move. Some of my states have been in development for 2 years. Some did it in 9 months.
Right.
Just kind of depends. So they're all just a little bit different, but it's very customized for each individual and how they want to move that work forward.
So there's a question in chat to help me understand. The programs do get Department of Labor dollars, but you guys don't for your intermediary work. Is that correct?
Programs. I'm not sure I understand the question. The programs get DOL
So
dollars.
like, does what's a state that you're working in?
They do not necessarily get Department of Labor dollars. In
Okay,
fact,
so it's
none of
not.
our, currently only one of our states has been able to garner Department of Labor dollars, Minnesota. Because of the relationship they've built through this process, they actually now have a contract with their state Department of Labor. Each state Department of Labor decides where their funding goes. So it's individual. And that can be at the state level, and then that can go down to the workforce board. So it could even be local in your communities. They can decide where that is. All of our states are working on that, but Department of Labor funds are tricky. We could spend a whole nother time talking about how those funds, but most Department of Labor funds are tied to the individual apprentice, which if you're trying to do a program and operating 40, 50 apprentices, having to do individual paperwork for each apprentice is a little tricky.
Right.
And just cumbersome and like trying to make a whole budget. Well, what if one person doesn't get renewed or the timing is wonky or they come all in different times? It gets a little tricky. There are some pots of larger funding, but that's completely up to your state or local workforce to decide how those are done. U.S. Department of Labor is funding the intermediary work, and that's from federal. So individuals can access intermediary and not have to pay anything from those intermediaries, but that's all U.S. Department of Labor, not your states.
And as you're talking, I was reminded, so the T.E.A.C.H, in Massachusetts, we have, a couple of different models. So the T.E.A.C.H Institute is engaged in the Good Jobs Challenge initiative, and they're starting to think about the evaluative and documentation. So I'm going to put, they just posted an RFP. This is for the 930 callers, maybe for your information, Megan, to help spread the word about folks applying for that. So I'll put that link in chat. So as you kind of look across these 7 states that you're working in just all the work that everyone has learned at T.E.A.C H over the years, what are some lessons learned? I mean, we know kind of the obvious, like you said, building the team, building the relationships. But when it comes to the actual kind of like implementation, what advice or what thoughts come up for you?
Yeah, I think with apprenticeship, it's complex and it's messy. So I gather your resources where you can. If you can work with an intermediary, do it. Whether we are the right fit or one of the others, I'm happy to connect you with one, whichever one is a good fit. Work with them where you can. With that funding, they're not that we don't charge. I mean, there's not a fee to participate. So take that expertise if available. The second is apprenticeship offers the opportunity to really put together, I think, what we've all known for a very long time. We individualize for children. Apprenticeship allows us to individualize for the adult learner, of course. And we're taking related technical instruction. And for us, that's higher education. We don't do any apprenticeships that are not connected to higher education. And the on the job, the hands on, and being able to apply those two things, like how much better of an educator would I have been if I could have done all of that at the same time and had somebody to guide me through that, like providing actual on like, hey, you tried that, but what if you did this? Oh, that's great. Or just letting me know that was wonderful. Like I mean, we all would have flourished and probably still be in a classroom. Who knows? And I think it gives us the opportunity to blend those two things in a really unique way. So I think looking for that connective tissue where you can put the apprentice at the center of it, put the recipient, the workforce at the center of your project, and really keep that, because the paperwork can eat you up. The documentation can eat you up really quickly with apprenticeship. Don't get stuck there. Really look for that connection and how you can bring it back down, and try to use that intermediary or resources where you can for the paperwork, because the documentation can be very intense. The paperwork can be a lot. Reach out to people who are already running apprenticeship programs. Like, don't reinvent the wheel. Don't reinvent the paperwork. My states all share. One state creates a document, let's share it with everybody, and then they can just modify it. There's no reason to reinvent that wheel. And I think that's one of the things we've learned is pull together where you can. We hold a peer learning community for our states where they can talk and share and interact. We also, our team out in Colorado, there's other apprenticeship programs beyond ours happening there. They all meet. They have a consortium now that all meet together of apprenticeships and talk about some of these types of things, because there doesn't need to just be one strategy. So I think really looking for that resource building where you can, and then that connective tissue to keep it back to the apprentice level is really important.
And so we've, in talking about this and talking about workforce strategies in general. So we have the incumbent workforce, the people who are doing the work, who, like you said, if we all could have had the supports. And then we have kind of this recruitment, like we need folks to join the field. How do you think about apprenticeships, and like where does it fit in for those kind of that continuum?
Yeah, I think there's a real potential here. You've got to pick a place to start. You've got to pick a point A. So all of our apprenticeship programs currently started at the associate's level for those wanting to earn an associate's degree. Most of our workforce have credits in some capacity. Right. They just may not have a degree yet. So that's where we started, but we are very quickly expanding because we knew we wanted to cover the entire career path, whether they start in high school and want to come into early childhood or come in later through an alternative career path, like many of us did. Right. So we are looking at developing both apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeships for high school students who want to come into the early childhood field. And then for those that maybe this is a career change for them and want to start with a credential, whether that's a CDA or a state credential. It doesn't have to be the CDA. It could be a state credential, and we are actively building apprenticeships to pull them in for that pipeline wherever they are. But again, for somebody who's newer in the field, connecting your college and connecting the on the job with a mentor or journey worker that can provide insight and feedback directly, immediate feedback, we're hoping the data shows that that's invaluable in retaining them and keeping them, because we all know those first couple of years are the highest rate of turnover. Because right. you don't know how to manage your classroom as effectively. So it's a little more chaotic, right? We get better as we know more.
Ann Candelas from Springfield shares one of the biggest issues we've seen in our region is the capacity of our employers and others to pursue these opportunities. Having support to convene, apply, and manage these programs is a critical need. So anything else to say about that?
Again, I encourage you to find an intermediary and the one that fits. They all approach their work very differently. We serve as what's called a sponsor. So we really take all of the administrative and convening out of the equation for our programs so that, again, they can focus on the work, because you guys have there's a lot happening already. They don't need the extra management of all those, because you're right, it is a lot of work. It's much more complex than people think. And that can really be a deterrent. I mean, the paperwork process alone can be a huge deterrent to somebody taking on an apprenticeship. So again, I think finding an intermediary that's a good fit is really critical, or a network of folks who may be taking this on, that maybe somebody already went through it and can be that resource. Right. But it can be a roadblock. I mean, you are absolutely right.
And when you think about apprenticeship, like what are the components? So you talked about a credential, you talked about a connection to higher ed. What else is part of it when you all think about apprenticeships? Yeah,
so there's several key components of an apprenticeship, of any registered apprenticeship. There's lots of programs coining as apprenticeships, but may not be registered, kind of like an accreditation. So think of it very similar kind of a way. They have to have a paid job component. So they have to connect to employment in some capacity. They have to connect to a nationally recognized degree or credential. They have to have on-the-job training. So they have to actually receive that on-the-job training. They have to be connected to related technical instruction. For our apprenticeships, again, that is all higher education. Some apprenticeships use other training entities for that. Everybody has some flexibility there. Those are kind of those key components. And then they all have to lead to a compensation increase. You cannot have an apprenticeship without a wage increase. It can't be a supplement, a stipend, a bonus. It has to be an actual hourly wage increase.
And how do you work with states to figure that out?
Well, that is a great question, because it is tricky. I won't sugarcoat that. It is tough. Working with states that already have a T.E.A.C.H program and or a scholarship program that has compensation built into it,
Mhm.
that helps. So all of our T.E.A.C.H states inherently have compensation built into that program. That's a natural fit that helps. So we're not selling much more
Right.
for employers. We're not asking too much more of them. So states that have a compensation strategy built into their scholarship programs is extremely helpful. And then really listening to the employers as part of your team. What is doable? What is not doable? We all know we'd like to do much more than's available.
Right.
And then working with your funders to talk about what does that mean and what could they potentially help with? How do we bridge these gaps? It's short term, long term. We are finding that a lot of employers and funders, they all know the importance. I mean, nobody undervalues the need for compensation. But when we can say, well, let's give an employer a stipend for participation, let's
Right.
make it $5,000 a year. Well, essentially, I just gave you money to pay for their compensation.
Right.
We may not be
Right.
calling it that, but that's what we're
Sure.
able to do. And if we can do that for a couple of years and help you think through the business strategy of how to do that long term, we've bought everybody some time. It's not
Right.
ideal, it's not perfect, it's not what we would hope, and continue in that space to advocate for more. I mean, we don't leave that lens out.
Right.
But that does give us, from an employer perspective, some time. If I go to an employer and say, I'm going to provide you a stipend of $5,000 per apprentice per year, if you have 3 or 4 apprentices, that starts to add up very quickly
Sure.
as a meaningful investment of their time. I mean, this is a meaningful investment everybody's making. Now we're going to help support you with some business practices or what resources they need as an employer to try to think this out. But we've just given ourselves roughly 2 to 3 years to think that through just a
Right.
little bit. But it's tricky. The compensation component is not easy, and that looks a little different in every state. I wish I could say I have solved that.
Magic.
I
No
have
magic.
not. Yeah, have not yet.
Appreciate that. Leslie Baker reminds us that neighborhood villages in Boston and CCC in Central Mass are two well-established ECE apprenticeship programs in Mass. We both act as intermediaries for employee partners. Please reach out if we can help. Thank you, Leslie Baker. I'm glad you're here. Megan, any final thoughts? I think, to kind of go back to the beginning about like this, like there's always like a new thing or something that we're focused on. Like, how do we make sure that apprenticeships and this idea of supporting folks kind of in this way isn't just like a great idea for 3 years?
Yeah, I think applying what we already know. I mean, like I said, we individualize for children. This is individualizing for apprenticeship. I tell a lot of states, I don't think apprenticeship is going to be as large as some of our other workforce strategies. I think we have to be honest about that. It's expensive. But I think targeting those in your community that really need it, maybe those entry level or family home, I mean, your need maybe look different, but find that need and focus the strategy in for them. Tailor the support where you think you need it the most. Mine goes to the new workforce and to those that need it the most. I think you're going to get, your biggest return right there if we can recruit and if we can retain.
Thanks so much for joining us, Megan. From Texas, I should have welcomed you to Massachusetts here this morning. Thank you for all the resources. And I think if folks have time to look through T.E.A.C.H, I see you put your email in the chat, so we'll be happy to follow up with you. One more chat. Massachusetts needs to extend this program to Western Mass. Hopefully neighborhood villages can cover this area soon. So Megan, thank you so much for all your work. And if you hear any updates or anything we should know, please come back anytime to the 9:30 call.
Absolutely. Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, Megan. Tomorrow we'll hear an update on the early childhood agenda. We will see you then. Take care.